The massive circular chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with activity as representatives of various alien civilizations gathered. The air shimmered with holographic displays of data, each conveying the latest updates about the different sectors of the galaxy. At the heart of the chamber stood a tall, slender figure, Ambassador Threx of the Zaltrax cluster. His exoskeleton gleamed under the soft lighting as he conversed with a fellow ambassador. Nearby, Human Representative Commander Jack Dalton observed quietly, his eyes scanning the assorted species in attendance. "Threx, I must urge caution," said Lyria, an ambassador from the serene planet of Yolvanda. Her voice was soft, yet carried an urgent undertone. "The humans, they are not like the other young races. Their technology, particularly their weaponry, is alarmingly advanced." Threx clicked his mandibles in annoyance. "Advanced, perhaps, but they lack our centuries of strategic experience. Their society is still fractured, not unified like ours. This fear is exaggerated." Dalton approached them, his gaze steady. "I couldn't help but overhear. While it's true we have our divisions, underestimate us at your peril. We didn't climb to the stars with idle hands." Lyria nodded at Dalton, her expression thoughtful. "And yet, Commander, isn't it true that your people value peace? Why then such powerful weapons?" Dalton's jaw set firmly. "History has taught us a harsh lesson on preparedness. We build, yes, but we also protect." The chamber quieted as the Council's president, a venerable entity known as Elder Sum, took to the central platform. "Esteemed delegates," Sum began, his voice echoing through the translators embedded in each seat. "We convene today amidst rumors of war and conquest involving the human race. I implore all to heed the treaties we've forged. Let us not ignite conflicts that could consume us." Threx stood, addressing the council. "Elder Sum, with respect, my cluster views this as a matter of security. The human expansion is unchecked and nears our borders. We must be proactive to defend our interests." Dalton rose in response. "Ambassador Threx, humanity seeks no conflict with Zaltrax or any other. But make no mistake, we will defend ourselves if provoked. The power of our weapons is not a secret, nor is it our wish to use them." Whispers filled the chamber as various ambassadors discussed amongst themselves. Sum raised a hand for silence. "It is the decision of this council that all members should avoid any unilateral actions that might lead to violence. The human race is to be observed, not provoked." As the meeting adjourned, Dalton and Threx shared a long look. "A word of advice, Threx," Dalton said quietly as the room emptied. "It's not the weapons you should fear. It's what happens when you corner a desperate man with nothing left to lose." Threx snorted. "Or what happens when you underestimate your opponent. We shall see, Commander. We shall see." As the delegates dispersed, the tension lingered, thick and palpable. Outside the chamber, stars twinkled, indifferent to the brewing storm. Dalton walked away, his mind racing with scenarios, each playing out the potential horrors of what might come if words failed where weapons would not hesitate to speak. The morning light of Viridian's twin suns filtered through the thin atmosphere, casting a warm glow over the fledgling human colony. The settlement, a cluster of modular habitats surrounded by newly erected defensive structures, hummed with activity as colonists went about their daily routines. Among them, Commander Jack Dalton surveyed the perimeter with a cautious eye, always aware of the potential dangers lurking beyond the horizon. On the edge of the settlement, a group of children played in the structured safety of a communal area, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension that gripped their elders. Dalton smiled briefly at the sight, a reminder of what they were all fighting to protect. Unbeknownst to the colonists, high above their tranquil outpost, a Zaltraxian scout ship hovered, cloaked and silent. Inside, Ambassador Threx observed the humans through advanced sensors, his interest piqued by their rapid adaptation to such a harsh environment. "Commander Threx," his aide, Zilth, a tactical officer, interrupted his thoughts. "Initial scans suggest their technology is primarily defensive. There is little here that poses a direct threat to our forces." Threx nodded, his gaze still fixed on the readouts. "Keep monitoring. I want to know everything about their capabilities, and zoom in on that gathering in the central area." The screen shifted, focusing on the children. Threx studied them curiously. "Fascinating. They seem so carefree, so unaware. Prepare a ground team. We need samples, soil, flora, and—" He paused, considering the implications. "Non-invasive scans of those juveniles. I want to understand their biology." Back on the ground, Dalton's comlink buzzed. He tapped it, listening to the urgent report from the colony's sensor technician. Commander, we're detecting anomalies in the upper atmosphere. It could be a cloaked vessel. Alert status red, Dalton commanded without hesitation. Evacuate the non-essential personnel to the shelters. I'll handle the external defense. As the alert sounded, the colonists moved quickly but orderly, trained for such emergencies. Dalton grabbed his weapon and headed to the command center, his mind racing with strategies. In orbit, Threx's team prepared for a stealth descent. Remember, we are here to observe and collect, not to engage, Threx reminded them. His order, however, would soon lead to unforeseen consequences. The Zaltraxian team deployed using advanced stealth technology to land near the edge of the settlement. As they approached, one of the younger scouts, overly eager and less experienced, strayed too close to where the human children played. One of the children, a small girl curious about a strange shimmer in the air, the slight distortion caused by the scout's imperfect cloaking, ventured too close. In a panic, the scout activated a defensive pulse, not intended to harm but powerful enough to startle and knock the child to the ground. The laughter stopped abruptly as the child cried out, her knees scraped and bleeding. The sudden shift in atmosphere was palpable. Dalton, hearing the cry over the din of preparations, turned and ran towards the sound. His heart sank as he saw the injured child and the faint outline of the departing scout. Threx, he muttered under his breath, his earlier warning unheeded. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. As the Zaltraxian ship retreated, alarms blared throughout the colony. Dalton cradled the frightened child, his resolve hardening. No more observing, he whispered grimly. It's time they learn what happens when you threaten ours. The stage was set for conflict, ignited by a moment of fear and a misunderstanding, and what followed would shake the foundations of interstellar relations. The dusty orange glow of Viridian's setting suns cast long shadows across the main settlement as the day's tension heightened. News of the alien encounter spread rapidly among the colonists, stoking fears and anger within the community. Commander Jack Dalton, having ensured the safety of the injured child, now faced the daunting task of managing the crisis. Inside the colony's makeshift council room, Dalton convened an emergency meeting with his senior officers and community leaders. The room buzzed with anxious murmurs as everyone awaited the commander's address. Ladies and gentlemen, Dalton began, his voice steady despite the turmoil. Today's incident marks a critical juncture for us. A Zaltraxian scout engaged with one of our children, a clear act of aggression. Dr. Helen Reyes, the colony's chief medical officer, interjected. The child is stable, Jack. Scared, but physically she'll recover. We need to consider our next steps carefully. Dalton nodded, acknowledging her point. Thank you, Helen. Recovery is a priority, but we must also respond strategically. We cannot let this violation go unanswered. Our security team captured partial visuals of the scout, enough to confirm it was Zaltraxian. The room erupted in low conversations, with many voicing their concerns about the potential for escalated conflict. Dalton raised his hands, calling for calm. I understand your concerns, but we are far from helpless. Our settlement was designed with defense in mind, and our contingency plans are ready. As Dalton detailed the defensive measures, including drone surveillance and enhanced patrols, the colony's communications expert, Theo, received a high-priority signal. Commander, we have an incoming message from Earth Command. Dalton signaled Theo to put it on the main screen. The grim face of Admiral Sarah Briggs appeared, her expression grave. Commander Dalton, we've received your preliminary report. Earth Command takes this incident seriously. We are prepared to authorize a tactical response. You have clearance to engage with the necessary force to secure the colony. Dalton acknowledged the order with a solemn nod. Understood, Admiral. We'll proceed with caution. After the transmission ended, he turned back to the assembly. We have support from Earth. I propose a twofold strategy: increase our defenses and prepare for a potential strike if the Zaltraxians don't back off. I need all departments on high alert. The strategy meeting continued with discussions on logistics, medical readiness, and potential evacuation plans. Meanwhile, outside the council room, life in the colony tried to regain a semblance of normalcy. Parents hugged their children a little tighter, and neighbors shared quiet words of support. As night fell, Dalton stood alone outside, watching the stars. The weight of command was never heavier. His thoughts drifted to the injured child, her innocent curiosity leading to such dire consequences. He clenched his fists, resolved to protect his people at all costs. In the shadows of the settlement, unseen by the human colonists, a Zaltraxian observer recorded everything. The scouts' report would soon reach Ambassador Threx, igniting debates about their next move. Threx, unaware of the full human capabilities, underestimated the repercussions of the scouts' error. Back at the council room, Dalton finalized the night's watch schedule. "Stay vigilant," he instructed his team. "We're not just defending land, we're safeguarding our future. No Zaltraxian ship comes near without our knowing." Dalton returns to the council room, his silhouette merging with the dim light, a determined leader facing an uncertain dawn. Back on Earth, the Situation Room at United Defense Command buzzed with a tense energy, monitors displaying real-time data from across human space. Commander Jack Dalton's report from Viridian had set off a chain reaction, escalating the human response to a full military readiness. Admiral Sarah Briggs stood at the center of the room, her eyes fixed on the strategic display. Surrounding her were her top aides and military strategists, all equally focused on the looming threat. "Status report," Briggs demanded, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of background chatter and electronic beeps. "Viridian defenses are at full readiness, Admiral," replied Captain Jonas, the operations director. "Local forces are augmented by our orbital defense platforms. Additionally, surveillance drones have been deployed in a perimeter sweep pattern." Briggs nodded, her expression grim. "And the Zaltraxian movements?" "Intelligence suggests they've pulled back slightly, but we've spotted several unidentified blips near the sector border. Could be recon or preparatory positioning," answered Lieutenant Grace, the head of intelligence. Briggs tapped her fingers on the console. "They're testing our responses. Prepare to launch the Hammerfall drones. I want a show of force. Let's make it clear we're not to be trifled with." The room responded with a flurry of activity as orders were relayed and personnel moved to execute her commands. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Dalton prepared his own response on Viridian. Commander Dalton received the go-ahead from Earth Command. His face, usually calm and composed, now bore a hardened resolve. He stood in the orbital defense station, overseeing the preparation of the counterstrike. "Commander, Hammerfall drones are online and ready for your command," reported Sergeant Hayes, the station's chief tactical officer. "Target the last known positions of the Zaltraxian scouts. I want minimal casualties, Hayes. This is a warning shot," Dalton instructed, his voice firm. "Yes, sir. Engaging in 3, 2, 1. Launch initiated." Outside the station, a silent ballet of death unfolded as drones slipped away into the darkness of space, their trajectories set for the fringes of the Zaltraxian-occupied zones. The drones were equipped with non-lethal payloads designed to incapacitate and deter rather than destroy. Back on Earth, Briggs monitored the strike's progress. The screens showed the successful deployment of the drones, striking precise, predetermined coordinates with stunning accuracy. The message was clear. Humanity would defend its people. "Admiral, initial reports indicate direct hits on 4 of the 5 targets. Zaltraxian ships are retreating from the engagement zones," Grace reported. Briggs allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. "Keep monitoring their movements, and get me a direct line to Commander Dalton. I want updates every 15 minutes. As Dalton awaited feedback from the drone strike, his communicator buzzed. It was Admiral Briggs. "Commander, well done. Continue to hold your position. We're sending additional resources," she stated. "Thank you, Admiral. We'll keep the pressure on. They won't find Viridian an easy target," Dalton replied, his tone resolute. Despite the successful defense, his thoughts were troubled, pondering the inevitable escalation that might follow. The Zaltraxians had underestimated humanity's resolve and technological prowess, a mistake that could lead them into a conflict none could afford. The conflict between humanity and the Zaltraxians rapidly intensified as battles erupted across multiple fronts. Human forces, previously underestimated by their alien adversaries, unleashed a staggering display of military prowess. Each encounter was marked by the precise and overwhelming use of human technology, which not only halted Zaltraxian advances, but also pushed them back towards their own territories. In the deep void of space near the Terrorized asteroid belt, a squadron of human fighters, led by the fearless Captain Elaine Maris, engaged in a fierce skirmish against a Zaltraxian patrol fleet. The blackness of space was lit by the brilliant flashes of energy weapons and the silent explosions of disabled ships. "Keep formation and target their flanks," Captain Maris commanded over the comms, her voice a steady beacon amid the chaos. The human pilots, trained for such encounters, executed her orders with lethal efficiency, outmaneuvering the larger, slower Zaltraxian ships. Meanwhile, on the surface of the moon Enceladus, another front had opened. Commander Jack Dalton himself led a ground assault against a Zaltraxian forward operating base. With his helmet visor down and his rifle at the ready, Dalton moved stealthily through the rugged terrain, his squad following in tight formation. "Echo Team, move to flank. Bravo, provide cover fire on my mark," Dalton whispered into his comlink. At his signal, the air filled with the sound of gunfire and the whir of drone support, pinning down the Zaltraxian forces. The Zaltraxians, though initially confident in their superior numbers, found themselves outclassed by the strategic and technological capabilities of the humans. Their energy shields, which could easily deflect standard weaponry, faltered under the specialized electromagnetic pulses of human tech. Back at the Galactic Council, emergency sessions were convened as reports of the escalating conflict flooded in. Ambassador Threx, facing mounting criticism and pressure, stood before the assembly, his stance defensive. "We did not anticipate this level of resistance," Threx admitted, his voice filled with frustration. "Humanity's technological advancements in warfare are exceptional. We must reconsider our approach." At the same time, on Earth, Admiral Sarah Briggs monitored the progress of the operations from the United Defense Command Center. The screens displayed a mix of live feeds and strategic maps, showing the advancing positions of human forces across contested zones. "Keep the pressure on. We can't let them regroup," Briggs ordered, her eyes scanning the data. "And get me an update on Dalton's team. They're deep in enemy territory." As night descended on Enceladus, Dalton and his squad achieved a critical victory, securing the Zaltraxian base. Weary but resolute, Dalton surveyed the captured facility, his mind already on the next phase of the operation. "We've got control, but this is far from over," he said to his team, his voice barely audible over the howl of the cold Enceladus wind. "Prepare for counterattacks. This war is just beginning." The fate of both species seemed increasingly tied to the outcome of these fierce encounters, each side driven by a desperate need to prevail. The Zaltraxian homeworld, once a bustling hub of interstellar administration and culture, now bore the scars of war. Craters and debris littered once majestic cities as the Zaltraxians faced the relentless advance of human military forces. In the Grand Assembly Hall of Zaltrax Prime, leaders gathered in a frenzied debate over their next course of action. Ambassador Threx, having returned from the Galactic Council under a cloud of disgrace, stood before his peers, his voice echoing through the tension-filled room. "We underestimated the humans' resolve and their technological capabilities," he admitted. "Our options are dwindling. We must consider seeking an armistice." Around him, the assembly erupted in shouts and murmurs of disbelief. "Surrender, after we provoke them. They won't stop until they've crushed us completely," argued a high-ranking general, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Then what do you propose? Continue fighting a war we are poised to lose? Every cycle we lose more ships, more lives," Threx countered, his tone desperate. The debate continued, with no clear consensus. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the situation grew increasingly grim for the Zaltraxians. Human forces, led by the indomitable Commander Jack Dalton, had begun the siege of a major military outpost on the outskirts of Zaltrax Prime. Under the light of Zaltrax Prime's twin moons, Dalton coordinated the positions of his troops. With a keen strategic mind, he deployed squads to key locations, ensuring the outpost remained encircled. "Keep tight. Watch for snipers," Dalton communicated to his teams, his eyes fixed on a holographic map displaying troop movements. In the heat of battle, a young lieutenant, fresh from Earth's military academies, approached Dalton. "Sir, Zaltraxian forces have sent a message. They're requesting a ceasefire to negotiate terms." Dalton paused, considering the implications. "Tell them we'll hold fire, but maintain positions. I'll handle this personally. Set up a secure line." Back on Zaltrax Prime, as Threx received word of the humans' willingness to negotiate, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Prepare my shuttle. I will go myself. Perhaps there is yet a chance for peace." As Threx's shuttle approached the besieged outpost under a white flag, Dalton met him at the designated no-man's land, a barren field marred by the scars of recent skirmishes. "Threx," Dalton greeted, not without a hint of wariness. "You started a fire and now you're feeling the heat. What assurances do we have that your call for peace is sincere?" Threx's voice was solemn, the weight of his species' plight clear in his tone. "Commander Dalton, I assure you, we acted in fear, not malice. We seek to preserve what is left of our people. Help us end this conflict, and we pledge to respect the borders and sovereignty of human-occupied space." Dalton studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I will relay your terms, but know this, Threx. Any sign of treachery and the ceasefire ends. We will resume operations without hesitation. Dalton, though skeptical, hoped for a resolution that would spare further loss of life, while Threx returned to his people, carrying the heavy burden of their survival. The smoke of battle hung heavily over the ruins of Zaltrax Prime as both human and Zaltraxian forces observed a tense ceasefire. Commander Jack Dalton walked through the devastated alien streets, his eyes taking in the destruction that his forces had wrought. Buildings that once touched the sky were now fractured edifices, and the air was thick with the scent of ionized particles. Dalton's comm device buzzed, and he paused to answer. It was Admiral Sarah Briggs, checking in from Earth Command. Commander, how are the negotiations proceeding? Briggs asked, her voice betraying her concern over the potential outcome. We're at a standstill, Admiral. They're desperate, but they're also proud. Threx is pushing for terms that ensure their sovereignty, but he's willing to accept demilitarization zones, Dalton reported, keeping his voice neutral as he watched a group of Zaltraxian civilians navigating the rubble. Keep the pressure, Jack, but be fair. We need a lasting peace, not a temporary truce that'll break at the next misunderstanding, Briggs advised. Dalton nodded, even though she couldn't see. Understood, Admiral. I'm heading to the negotiation table now. As Dalton approached the makeshift negotiation site, a bombed-out governmental building, he saw Ambassador Threx waiting with a small entourage. The Zaltraxian looked diminished, the weight of his world's fate clearly etched on his features. Commander Dalton, I hope today we can find a path to peace, Threx greeted, his voice weary. Let's get to it then, Dalton replied, gesturing to the table where maps of contested zones and proposed borders lay spread out. The negotiations were grueling, with each side conceding ground both metaphorically and literally. Dalton found himself moved by the plight of the Zaltraxian civilians and proposed a reconstruction aid package as a gesture of goodwill. Your people will need help rebuilding, Threx. We can provide support, technology, and advisors. It's not just about ending the war, it's about ensuring it doesn't start again, Dalton said, his proposal marking a significant turning point in the talks. Threx looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. That is unexpected, Commander. We accept, and we offer in exchange a permanent liaison office to coordinate between our governments. Perhaps over time, our people can learn from each other. As they signed the peace treaty, Dalton felt a cautious optimism. The war had taken its toll, and the scars would take generations to heal. But this was a start. After the formalities, Dalton walked back through the city, passing the ruins that were once homes and marketplaces. He paused by a makeshift memorial where Zaltraxian families mourned their lost. The site solidified his resolve that this peace, however fragile, was worth the effort. With Dalton sending a final report to Earth, Admiral Briggs, the treaty is signed. We've got peace, for now. It's time to help them rebuild and to ensure that no other child, human or Zaltraxian, has to fear the sky. His words echoed a new hope, not just for a cessation of hostilities, but for a future where such devastations could be avoided altogether. In the aftermath of the treaty signing, Earth's geopolitical landscape underwent a profound transformation. Commander Jack Dalton returned home as a hero, yet he carried the weight of the war's toll with a sober perspective. The world celebrated peace, but Dalton knew the reality of the fragile truce that hung like a thin veil over the scars of conflict. On Earth, at the United Defense Command headquarters, Dalton debriefed with Admiral Sarah Briggs and other high-ranking officials. The walls of the conference room, lined with screens showing news coverage and updates from Zaltrax Prime, served as a constant reminder of the ongoing recovery efforts. Commander Dalton, your leadership has not only secured our place in the galaxy, but also opened new avenues for diplomatic relations, Briggs commented, her tone both proud and grateful. Dalton nodded, acknowledging the compliment, but his thoughts were elsewhere. We need to stay vigilant, Admiral. Peace is more than just the absence of war. It's a continuous effort. Briggs agreed. Indeed, and your recommendation for the joint humanitarian missions has been approved. We'll be aiding Zaltrax Prime in their reconstruction. It's a chance to heal and to build trust. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of the galaxy, at the Galactic Council chambers, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism mixed with uncertainty. Ambassador Threx, now a proponent of peace, addressed the assembly, sharing the lessons learned from the conflict with humanity. Fellow council members, let us not forget the heavy cost of our oversight and haste to judge. The humans, though formidable, have shown a capacity for mercy and partnership. We must embrace this new era of cooperation, Threx spoke, his voice resonating through the chamber. The council members, representing diverse civilizations, murmured among themselves, their views shifting in the light of recent events. Humanity's role in the galaxy was now seen in a new light, not just as a military power, but as a potential ally in maintaining peace. Back on Earth, Dalton took some time to visit the family of the child whose unfortunate encounter had escalated the conflict. Sitting in their living room, he offered his condolences and shared the news of the peace treaty and the plans for mutual aid and rebuilding. The war started because of a tragedy that should have never happened. I promise you we're doing everything to make sure it never happens again, Dalton assured the child's parents, his voice thick with emotion. As he left their home, Dalton looked up at the stars, reflecting on the path ahead. The war had changed him, taught him the complexities of leadership and the harsh realities of interstellar politics. But more importantly, it had reaffirmed his commitment to safeguarding not only human interests, but also the sanctity of life throughout the galaxy. Dalton standing by a serene lake on Earth, watching the sunset. The water's surface mirrored the fiery skies, a symbol of the fiery trials they had endured and the calm that now followed. Humanity had indeed terrorized the galaxy, but in the end, it was their humanity that had paved the way for peace. Dalton's story concluded not with grand fanfare, but with quiet reflection, a fitting end for a man who had seen the best and worst of what it means to reach for the stars.